He wasn't supposed to come back, and yet the house stood there like a quiet defiance against everything the town believed about men like him. They used to slow their trucks when passing that dirt road, tires crunching over gravel, just to catch a glimpse of the place. Weathered siding, a sagging porch, and beneath it all, the rumor everyone laughed about. An underground shelter no one had ever seen, built by a veteran who talked to his dog more than to people. His name was Noah Walker, a former Marine with shoulders still squared out of habit, though the rest of him had softened into something quieter, heavier, like a man carrying more memory than breath. His skin was pale beneath the late summer sun, not from weakness but from a life spent indoors, away from curious eyes. And always at his side was Ash, a German shepherd with a sable coat that caught the light in shades of ash and bronze, ears sharp, eyes steady, watching the world the way soldiers do, measuring, remembering, never quite relaxing. The town didn't understand men like Noah, and it didn't try to. To them, he was the one who stacked firewood in perfect rows beneath his house, even in July heat, who spent nights digging and reinforcing something underground while others slept, who never explained why his dog refused to leave that spot beneath the porch for long. He's building himself a bunker for ghosts, someone once joked at the hardware store, and laughter followed, easy and careless, the kind that comes when people feel safe enough to mock what they don't understand. Noah heard about it, of course. Small towns carry words like wind carries dust. But he never answered. He just nodded once when spoken to, paid an exact change, and walked out with Ash pacing quietly beside him, the dog's gaze flicking once toward whoever had spoken, not with anger, but with something deeper, recognition, maybe, or patience. The house itself sat at the edge of a thin stretch of pine, where the air always smelled faintly of resin and dry earth, where the evenings cooled fast and the silence came early. At dusk, a dim yellow light would glow from the single window, casting long shadows across the stacked firewood beneath the porch. Every log was cut to the same length, every row aligned with a precision that felt less like preparation and more like ritual. And yet, no one had ever seen Noah burn any of it. Not in winter, not in cold snaps when frost clung to rooftops and breath hung visible in the air. The chimney stayed quiet. No smoke, no crackle, just stillness. That was the part that made people uneasy, though they wouldn't admit it. Because wood is meant to burn. It's meant to turn into heat, into something useful, something visible. But Noah's firewood just stayed. And Ash, he never lay near it. Not once. The dog would circle the porch, nose low, then settle at a distance, always facing the stacks, as if guarding them or waiting for something only he understood. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind moved through the trees and brushed against the house in long, soft breaths, neighbors swore they could hear faint sounds beneath the floorboards. Not digging, not movement, something quieter, a shift, a memory settling into place. They told themselves it was just the wood, expanding, contracting, reacting to the change in temperature. That's what made sense. That's what was safe to believe. But still they laughed. Because laughter is easier than asking questions that don't have simple answers. And Noah, he let them. He carried his silence like a promise, one hand resting absently on Ash's head as they stood beneath that porch at twilight, the dog's amber eyes fixed on the stacked wood, unblinking, as if both of them were waiting, not for fire, but for the moment when the truth would no longer stay buried. Morning came slow over the pines, a pale wash of light stretching across the quiet road, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch that house too soon. And Noah Walker was already awake, seated on the edge of his porch with a chipped enamel mug resting in his hand, the coffee long gone cold but untouched, because it was not the drink that kept him there. It was the stillness, the kind that let him listen without being seen listening, the kind that let him remember without anyone asking what he was remembering. And beside him, Ash stood alert, weight balanced forward, ears tilted toward the stacked firewood beneath the house, as though something beneath it had spoken first, and only he had heard it, his tail still, his breathing steady, a quiet sentinel in a world that had forgotten how to watch. Across the road, a pickup truck slowed just enough to stir dust into the morning air, the driver leaning slightly out the window with that familiar half-smile, the one that carried more judgment than humor. And though he did not call out, the glance he gave said everything it needed to say. The same unspoken question the town had asked for months now. What kind of man builds a shelter he never uses? What kind of man stacks what he never burns? And Noah did not return the look, not because he had not noticed, but because he had already answered that question in a place no one else had seen. He set the mug down beside him and rose slowly, joints stiff in a way that came not from age but from years lived under weight that did not show on the outside. And as he stepped down from the porch, the boards creaked in a familiar rhythm. One Ash recognized instantly, his head turning, eyes softening for just a moment before returning to their quiet vigilance. And Noah reached out, fingers brushing the thick fur along the dog's neck. A gesture so natural it needed no thought, no command, no explanation. Easy, he murmured, not as an order but as a reminder. And Ash exhaled once, low and controlled, the tension in his body easing but never fully leaving. Because some instincts do not rest, they only wait. The morning carried on around them, distant sounds of town life waking up, a screen door slamming somewhere far off, the hum of an engine starting, the faint echo of voices carried thin through the trees, all of it ordinary, all of it separate from the small world that existed beneath that house, a world defined not by what could be seen, but by what had been chosen to remain hidden. And Noah moved toward the stacked wood, crouching beside it with a familiarity that bordered on reverence, his hand resting lightly against one of the logs, fingers tracing the grain as though reading something written there long ago, something only he and Ash understood. The wood felt cool, unchanged by the rising warmth of the day, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, not in weariness, but in recognition, as if the silence beneath his palm spoke back to him in a language the rest of the world had forgotten. Ash stepped closer then, not touching the stack, never touching it, but positioning himself just to the side, body angled outward, guarding not the wood itself but the space around it, the unseen boundary that no one else had been invited to cross. And Noah opened his eyes, glancing once toward the road, where another car passed more slowly this time, curiosity lingering longer than before, because silence, when it lasts long enough, begins to draw attention instead of avoiding it. He knew they would come eventually, not out of malice, but out of the simple human need to turn mystery into something explainable, something they could point to and say, there, that is all it was, nothing more, nothing worth fearing or respecting. And he let out a quiet breath, steady, measured, the kind that kept his hands from tightening, because he had learned long ago that truth does not need to be defended. It only needs to be revealed at the right moment. Ash's ears shifted again, catching something distant, something approaching with more intention than the passing trucks or idle glances. And Noah felt it too, not as sound, but as a change in the air, a subtle shift that told him the quiet they had held onto for so long was beginning to thin. And he did not move away from the wood, did not step back, did not hide, because whatever came next had already been waiting beneath their feet, patient, unmoving, just like the firewood that never burned. The sound reached them before the sight of it did, tires crunching slower this time, not passing through but easing to a stop along the edge of the road, as if whoever sat inside had finally decided that curiosity was worth more than distance. And Noah did not turn immediately. He did not need to, because Ash had already shifted, body angled toward the direction of the vehicle, ears forward, posture tightening just enough to signal that this was no longer background noise, but intention. And a moment later the engine cut, leaving behind a silence that felt different from the kind Noah had grown used to. This one heavier, expectant, like the pause before a question is asked out loud. The truck door opened with a dull creak, followed by the sound of boots meeting gravel, measured steps that carried across the short stretch of land without hurry. And Noah rose from his crouched position beside the stacked wood, brushing his hands together once, more out of habit than necessity, before turning to face whoever had come, his expression calm, unreadable, the same look he had worn in places far louder than this, places where silence meant something else entirely. The man approaching was someone Noah recognized, not by name, but by presence, the kind of man who belonged to the center of town, who spoke easily in groups, who carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never had to question the ground beneath his feet. Mid-40s maybe, clean work shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, eyes scanning more than greeting, and behind him, still by the truck, Another figure remained seated, watching, waiting, as if this visit had been discussed before it ever happened. "Morning," the man called out, voice casual but edged with something firmer beneath it, and Noah gave a small nod in return, nothing more, because words, once spoken, had a way of pulling things forward before they were ready. The man stepped closer, close enough now to see the stacked firewood clearly, to notice the precision of it, the way each piece fit into the next like something assembled rather than gathered, and he let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite approval. "We have been meaning to come by," he said, glancing briefly toward the porch, then back to Noah. "Town has been talking. You know how that goes." Noah said nothing, and the space between them held for a second longer than comfort usually allowed, long enough for the man to shift his weight, to adjust his stance, as if recalibrating the approach he had planned. "It is just," the man continued, gesturing loosely toward the wood beneath the house. "People are curious. You have got all this stacked up, and no one has ever seen you use it. Not in winter, not ever. Figured maybe you had a reason." The word reason hung there, softer than accusation but heavier than simple curiosity, and Ash moved then, one step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just present, placing himself slightly ahead of Noah, his gaze steady on the man, amber eyes unblinking, and for the first time, the man's voice paused, his attention shifting downward, recognizing something in the dog that was not easily dismissed. Noah reached down, resting his hand lightly against Ash's shoulder, a quiet anchor, and then finally, he spoke, his voice low, even, carrying none of the tension that hovered in the air. "Wood stays dry longer when it is covered," he said, simple, factual, an answer that revealed nothing and yet was entirely true. The man nodded once, but it was clear from his expression that the answer had not settled anything inside him, that the question had only shifted shape. "Right?" he replied, glancing again at the rose, then toward the underside of the porch, where shadow gathered thicker than it should have in daylight. "But that is not all that is down there, is it?" It was not a question this time, not really, more of a statement offered carefully, testing the ground between assumption and confirmation, and Noah did not react, not outwardly, but his fingers pressed just slightly more firmly into Ash's fur, a subtle change that only the dog seemed to register, his ears flicking once, his body stilling further, as if the space beneath the house had just become something more than quiet. The second man by the truck shifted then, opening the door and stepping out, drawn closer now by the lack of resolution, by the feeling that something just out of sight was waiting to be uncovered, and the two of them stood there across from Noah, the morning light stretching longer across the dirt, the shadows shifting slowly beneath the porch, and for a moment, no one spoke at all. Then the first man took a small step forward, just enough to close the distance, his eyes moving from Noah to the stacked wood and back again. "Mind if we take a closer look?" he said, voice steady but no longer casual, because curiosity, once it crosses a certain line, stops pretending to be harmless. Noah let the silence sit for a second longer, feeling the weight of it settle into place, and then he nodded once, slow, deliberate, not as permission, but as acknowledgement, and Ash did not move aside, did not step back. He only turned his head slightly, watching, waiting, as if he already knew that whatever they were about to see had never been meant for laughter in the first place. The first man moved carefully, not with fear but with a growing awareness that something beneath that porch did not belong to ordinary explanations, his boots stepping onto the edge of the packed dirt where the shadow thickened, and he crouched slightly, reaching toward one of the stacked pieces of firewood as if testing whether it was as simple as it appeared, and Ash's body shifted instantly, not lunging, not barking, but stepping forward just enough to place himself between the man and the stack, his presence quiet but unmistakable, a line drawn without words, and the man paused, hand hovering in the air for a second before pulling it back, glancing up at Noah with a look that was no longer amused, no longer dismissive, but searching. "He does not like that," the man said, trying to keep his tone light, but the lightness did not hold. Noah remained where he was, one hand resting at his side, the other still loosely near Ash's shoulder, his voice calm when he answered. "He knows what matters," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made the second man step closer from behind, drawn in now, curiosity no longer casual, but edged with something heavier. The first man exhaled slowly, then straightened up, brushing his palms together as if clearing dust that was not there, and instead of reaching directly for the wood again, he shifted his attention to the space beneath the porch itself, where the rows ended and the darkness began, and for a moment he simply stood there, eyes adjusting, trying to see past what the light allowed. "There is space back there," he said quietly, more to himself than to Noah, and then he stepped to the side, lowering himself further, leaning in just enough to look beyond the first row. The angle changed everything. What had seemed like a solid wall of stacked wood from the outside revealed small, deliberate gaps between certain pieces, not random, not accidental, but placed with intention, forming narrow lines that guided the eye inward if one knew how to look. And the man's expression shifted again, the last trace of dismissal leaving his face. "This is not just stacked," he murmured. Behind him, the second man stepped closer, peering over his shoulder, his brow tightening as he followed the same lines, the same subtle pattern, and Ash remained still, watching, not interfering. Now, as if the moment they had reached was one that could not be stopped, only witnessed. The first man reached out again, slower this time, more deliberate, and instead of grabbing a piece at random, he touched one of the logs that sat slightly offset from the others, fingers pressing against it with cautious pressure, and it did not shift the way wood should. It did not scrape or creak. It held firm, anchored by something unseen, and he looked back at Noah, confusion now replacing confidence. "This is fixed," he said. Noah gave a single nod. "Yes." The man hesitated, then pushed again, a little firmer, and this time the piece moved, not outward, but inward, sliding back with a muted, controlled motion that made no sound of wood against wood, only a faint, hollow shift that came from beneath, and both men froze for a moment, eyes widening just slightly, as the illusion broke in front of them. The space behind the stack opened not into loose dirt or simple storage, but into something structured, something built with care, edges too clean, surfaces too even, the interior lined not with rough earth, but with panels that caught the dim light in a dull, metallic sheen, and the air that drifted out carried no scent of pine or sap, but something colder, something preserved. The second man let out a low breath. "That is not firewood," he said, almost under his breath. Noah did not answer right away. He stepped forward then, past Ash, who moved aside only enough to let him pass, and crouched near the opening, his hand resting briefly against the shifted piece, steadying it as if it mattered how it was held even now. And then he looked at the two men, his gaze direct but not confrontational. "It never was," he said. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but final, and for the first time since they had arrived, neither man tried to speak over it. Instead, they both leaned in slightly, drawn by what they could now see just beyond the opening, shapes within the dim interior that did not belong to a pile of wood, edges of containers, the faint outline of something wrapped, something kept, and the realization moved through them slowly, replacing curiosity with something closer to understanding, though not yet complete. Ash lowered himself then, not in rest, but in watchfulness, his body aligned with the opening, his eyes steady, as if this place beneath the house was not something hidden from the world out of fear, but something held back until the world was ready to see it without laughing. And Noah remained there beside the opening, one hand resting lightly against the edge, his posture unchanged, as if he had been waiting not for this moment to happen, but for it to arrive on its own terms, without force, without explanation, just truth, revealed one careful step at a time. The air inside the opening felt different the moment it was exposed, not colder in temperature, but steadier, like a place that had been sealed not to hide, but to preserve, and the first man leaned in further, his eyes adjusting as shapes within the dim space sharpened into something recognizable yet unexpected, rectangular containers lined with careful precision, surfaces clean, edges aligned, each one marked not with labels for storage, but with small, deliberate engravings that caught the light just enough to be seen without announcing themselves. "This is military," the second man said quietly, the certainty in his voice replacing the earlier doubt, and Noah did not correct him, because it was not wrong, only incomplete. He reached forward then, not to open anything, not to reveal everything at once, but to slide one of the containers slightly forward, enough for the light to fall across its surface, and the engraved letters became clearer, not codes, not serial numbers, but names, full names etched with a steadiness that spoke of time taken, of care given, of something more than record-keeping. The first man read one aloud without meaning to, his voice softer now, stripped of its earlier confidence. "Daniel Harris," he said, and then he stopped, because saying the name felt different here, like speaking it inside a place where it had weight. Noah rested his hand lightly on the edge of the container, not claiming it, not guarding it, just acknowledging it, and Ash shifted closer, lowering himself beside Noah with a quiet exhale, his body aligned with the row of containers as if he recognized each one not by sight, but by something deeper, something carried in scent and memory. They were not supposed to be left behind, Noah said, his voice even, but carrying something beneath it that did not need volume to be felt. And the two men looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time since they had stepped onto his property, seeing not just the quiet man in front of them, but the distance in his eyes, the kind that comes from places where promises are made without witnesses. The second man swallowed once, glancing back at the containers, then at the rest still hidden in shadow. "These are," he began, but did not finish, because the answer had already formed in his mind, and Noah gave a slight nod, completing it without words. "What came back when they could not," he said. The space beneath the house seemed to settle around that sentence, as if it had been waiting to be spoken aloud, and the first man shifted his stance, no longer leaning in with curiosity, but standing back slightly, giving the opening a kind of respect that had not been there before. "You kept all of this here," he said, not as a question, but as a realization, and Noah's gaze moved briefly across the row of containers before returning to him. "No one came for them," he replied simply. No one knew where to look. The words were not bitter, not accusing, just stated the way facts are stated when they have already been accepted. Ash's ears flicked once, his eyes moving slowly along the line, pausing for a fraction of a second at each container as if marking them, counting them, remembering them, and the second man let out a quiet breath, stepping back another inch, his hands resting at his sides, unsure now where to place them, because nothing in front of him fit the frame he had walked in with. "And the wood," he said after a moment, his voice almost careful now. "You made it look like," Noah finished the thought for him. "Something worth ignoring," he said. There was no pride in it, no satisfaction, just a quiet understanding of how the world worked, how easily people looked past what they thought they understood. The first man nodded slowly, the earlier tension in his shoulders gone, replaced by something heavier, something closer to humility, and he glanced once more at the containers, at the names, at the careful order of it all. "We thought you were hiding," he admitted, the words coming out slower now, stripped of their earlier edge. Noah shook his head once, a small movement. "No," he said. "I was keeping." The difference hung there, simple but absolute, and neither man tried to argue it. The morning light had shifted further now, reaching just enough into the opening to illuminate the first row fully, the engraved names clear, steady, undeniable, and for a long moment, no one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been revealed in the quietest way possible. Ash remained still beside Noah, his presence unwavering, a living reminder that some bonds do not end when the world looks away, they only change form, waiting in silence until someone is willing to see them for what they truly are. The silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt full, like a room that had finally been opened after years of being kept closed for the right reasons. And neither of the men spoke right away because something in the air beneath that porch made words feel smaller than they had a moment ago, as if language itself needed to adjust before it could catch up to what had just been seen. The first man shifted his weight slowly, eyes still fixed on the engraved names, his earlier confidence now replaced by something quieter, something more careful, and when he finally looked up at Noah, there was no trace of the casual judgment he had carried onto the property. "How long?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of anything unnecessary, and Noah did not hesitate, because time had never been something he avoided, only something he carried. "Since they stopped asking where they went," he said, and the answer landed softly but deeply, filling the space between them with a truth that did not need numbers to be understood. The second man let out a slow breath, glancing back toward the road as if seeing the town differently now. The same houses, the same people, but with a gap in the story he had never noticed before. No one knew, he said, not as an excuse, but as a realization, and Noah gave a small nod, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging the weight of it. Ash lifted his head slightly, his gaze moving from the containers to the two men, watching them with that same steady awareness he had held from the beginning, as if measuring not their presence, but their understanding, and for the first time, neither man looked away from him. You stayed, the first man said after a moment, the words coming slowly, as if he was piecing together something that had been there all along. Noah's eyes moved briefly across the row of containers again, then back to the man. Someone had to, he replied, and there was no pride in it, no sense of sacrifice, just a statement of fact, the kind that does not ask to be admired, only accepted. The second man stepped closer again, not to inspect, not to question, but to stand near the opening with a kind of quiet respect, his hands now still at his sides. His posture changed in a way that could not be undone. "And the town," he began, then stopped, because the sentence did not need to be finished, and Noah answered it anyway. They needed something simple, he said, a story they could understand. The first man nodded slowly, the truth of that settling into him with a weight that felt personal now, as if he had been part of that story without realizing what it had replaced. "We laughed," he said quietly, not looking at Noah, not looking at the containers, just letting the words sit between them, and Noah did not respond, because some acknowledgments are not meant to be answered, only heard. Ash shifted then, rising from where he had been lying, stepping forward just enough to stand beside Noah again, his shoulder brushing lightly against the man's leg, a small, grounding contact that carried more meaning than any reassurance spoken out loud. The morning had moved on around them, the sun now higher, the light stronger, reaching further beneath the porch and illuminating more of what had been hidden, and with it came a change in the way everything felt, not exposed, but revealed, as if the truth had simply stepped into the light it had been waiting for all along. The second man glanced back at the truck again, then at the road, and then back to Noah, his expression steady now, resolved in a way that had not been there before. "People should know," he said, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty, and Noah held his gaze for a moment before answering. "When they are ready to listen," he said, and the difference between those two things hung there, subtle but important, and neither man argued it. The first man looked down once more at the nearest container, at the name etched into its surface, and then he stepped back, giving the opening space again, not out of distance, but out of respect, as if he understood now that what lay beneath that house was not meant to be uncovered all at once, but approached with care, with patience, with something the town had not yet learned to offer. Ash remained still beside Noah, his eyes calm now, no longer guarded in the same way, as if something had shifted not in the world, but in the people standing before them, and Noah reached down once more, his hand resting on the dog's head, fingers pressing lightly into the fur, a quiet gesture that carried both gratitude and understanding. No one spoke after that, because there was nothing left to explain, only something to carry, and as the two men turned slowly back toward the road, their steps quieter than when they had arrived, the house behind them did not feel like a place of mystery anymore, but a place of memory, held steady by a man and a dog who had chosen not to let it be forgotten. By the time the truck pulled away, the road did not sound the same anymore. The gravel still crunching beneath the tires but carrying none of the earlier weight of curiosity or quiet judgment, only the steady rhythm of something that had shifted without needing to be announced. And Noah stood there a moment longer beneath the porch, watching the dust settle back into place as if the land itself preferred silence over explanation. Ash remained beside him, posture relaxed now but not careless, his ears still attentive to the fading sound, then slowly turning back toward the opening beneath the house, his gaze softening as though recognizing that what needed to be understood had finally been seen. Noah stepped forward again, crouching near the moved piece, his hand steady as he guided it back into place, the panel sliding with the same quiet precision it had revealed itself with, sealing the interior once more behind the illusion of ordinary wood, and the moment it settled, the space beneath the porch returned to shadow. Not hidden, but protected, the way something meaningful often is when it does not belong to the noise of the world. He did not rush the motion, did not stack anything differently, did not adjust the pattern, because nothing about what had been done required correction, only continuity, and Ash watched closely, his head tilting slightly as the final alignment fell back into place, his body easing into a calm that had not been present since the men arrived. The morning carried forward, the sounds of town returning faintly through the trees. But something subtle had changed in the air, not just around the house, but beyond it, as if the quiet truth beneath that porch had begun to move outward in ways that did not require words. Later that afternoon, another vehicle slowed near the road, but it did not stop, and the person inside did not lean out or stare too long, only glanced once toward the house, then continued on, the motion respectful in a way that had not existed before, and no one noticed it, not with surprise, but with recognition, the kind that comes when a story has begun to shift on its own. Ash stretched out near the porch, resting this time not at a distance, but closer than before, his body angled toward the stacked wood but no longer rigid, as if the need to guard had softened into something steadier, something that trusted the moment that had just passed. Noah sat down again on the worn wooden step, his elbows resting lightly on his knees, his gaze moving out toward the trees where the light filtered through in long, quiet beams, and for a while, he said nothing, because silence had always been the place where things made the most sense to him. A breeze moved through the pines, carrying with it the faint scent of dry earth and distant smoke from somewhere farther down the valley, and Noah closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to remember, the kind of remembering that does not bring pain forward, but holds it in place, steady and contained. Ash lifted his head slightly, watching him, then lowered it again, resting with a quiet sigh that seemed to match the rhythm of the wind, and in that moment, there was no distance between past and present, no separation between what had been lost and what had been kept, only a quiet balance that existed without needing to be named. The town would talk, of course, in softer voices now, in smaller groups, the laughter gone, replaced by something more careful, more thoughtful, and no one knew that would happen, not because he expected it, but because truth, once seen, has a way of changing how people carry their words. But he did not think about it for long, because the town was never what he had been holding on to. He reached down, resting his hand on Ash's head once more, fingers pressing gently into the familiar warmth, and the dog leaned into it without hesitation, eyes half closed, breathing slow, steady, present. The house stood quiet behind them, unchanged in its appearance, still weathered, still simple, still easy to overlook from the road, and beneath it, the rows remained exactly as they had been, aligned, ordered, remembered. And as the sun began its slow descent toward evening, casting longer shadows across the ground, Noah opened his eyes again and looked out at the road, not waiting for anyone to come, not expecting anything more, because some things, once revealed, do not need to be shown again. They simply remain, held in place by those who understand what it means to keep something safe long after the world has stopped asking where it went. Evening settled in slowly, the kind of quiet descent where the light does not disappear all at once, but lingers along the edges of things, stretching shadows across the ground as if reluctant to let go. And the house stood just as it always had, unchanged to anyone passing by, its weathered boards catching the last warmth of the day while the world beyond continued in its steady rhythm. But something unseen had shifted, not in the structure, not in the land, but in the way the silence held itself, no longer mistaken for emptiness, no longer dismissed as something to overlook. A truck passed again along the road, slower than before, the driver's eyes lingering not with curiosity, but with a quiet acknowledgement, the kind that does not need to be spoken to be understood, and the vehicle moved on without stopping, leaving behind no dust this time, only the soft hum of tires fading into distance. Noah sat on the porch, the same place he had sat that morning, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, as if time itself had folded gently around him without resistance. And Ash lay at his feet, stretched out with a calm that carried no tension, only awareness, his breathing deep and even, the rise and fall of his chest matching the slow rhythm of the evening air. The breeze moved through the pines again, softer now, carrying with it the scent of cooling earth and the faint trace of something distant, something familiar. And Noah watched the light shift across the ground, the long lines of shadow moving inch by inch toward the stacked wood beneath the house. For a moment, the golden light reached just far enough to touch the edges of the logs, illuminating them briefly before slipping away. And in that fleeting glow, the rose seemed less like wood and more like something intentional, something placed with care rather than gathered for use. And then the light moved on, leaving them once again in shadow, where they belonged. Ash lifted his head slightly, following the movement of that light as it faded, then turned his gaze back toward Noah, eyes soft, steady, as if confirming that nothing had been lost in the transition from day to night. Noah reached down, his hand finding the familiar place along the dog's neck, fingers resting there without pressing, a quiet contact that required no acknowledgement, and Ash leaned into it just enough to respond, not seeking comfort, but sharing it. The world beyond the trees continued, voices faint in the distance, a door closing somewhere far off. The sound carried thin through the cooling air, but none of it reached fully into the space around the house, as if this small stretch of land had chosen its own rhythm, separate from everything else. And beneath the porch, unseen and undisturbed, the rows remained exactly as they had been, aligned with care, names held in silence, stories kept without demand for recognition, not hidden out of fear, but protected out of purpose. Noah did not look toward the road again, did not wait for another visitor, because whatever needed to be seen had already been seen, and whatever needed to be understood would come in its own time, not forced, not explained, just revealed in the quiet way truth always is when it is allowed to remain steady. The sky darkened slowly, stars beginning to show faintly above the tree line, and the house settled into night with the same quiet strength it had carried through the day, unchanged, unremarkable to those who did not know, but holding within it something that no longer needed to prove its worth. And as the last light slipped away and the air cooled further, Noah remained there on the porch, his hand resting on Ash, both of them still, both of them present, not guarding what lay beneath, not hiding it, but simply staying, the way they always had, the way they always would, because some things are not meant to be carried away by the world, only kept safe until the world learns how to remember them. The night settled fully over the house without ceremony, no sudden shift, no sharp dividing line, just a gradual deepening of shadows until the world beyond the porch faded into a quiet that felt almost sacred, and Noah remained seated where he had been, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, as if he understood that some endings are not marked by movement, but by stillness. The stars had come out slowly, scattered across the sky like distant reminders of something larger than memory, and the air carried that soft chill that comes after a long day, wrapping the land in a calm that asked nothing from anyone. Ash lay beside him, his body relaxed but never unaware, his ears twitching occasionally at sounds too distant for most to notice, a faint rustle in the trees, the quiet shift of wind through branches, the subtle language of a world that continues even when no one is watching. Noah's hand rested gently along the dog's back, fingers still, not gripping, not guiding, just there, a quiet connection that did not need to be seen to be understood, and Ash leaned into it slightly, his breathing slow, steady, present. Beneath them, hidden once more behind the careful alignment of what appeared to be ordinary wood, the rows remained untouched, unchanged, each name held in silence, each memory kept without demand for recognition, and the house above it stood not as a monument, not as a statement, but as something simpler, something quieter, a place where what mattered had been given room to remain. The road beyond had gone still for the night, no headlights passing, no engines breaking the silence, and for the first time in a long while, the absence of sound did not feel like something waiting to be filled. It felt complete, as if everything that needed to be said had already found its place without words. Noah lifted his gaze slightly, looking out toward the dark line of trees where the land disappeared into shadow, and for a moment, there was something in his eyes that softened, not with relief, not with closure, but with recognition, the kind that comes when a promise has been carried long enough to become part of who you are. He did not speak, because there was no one there to hear him, and because the things that mattered most had never needed to be spoken out loud in the first place. Ash shifted beside him, lifting his head briefly, his eyes reflecting the faint starlight before settling again. His body angled just enough to remain between Noah and the unseen world beyond, not guarding out of fear, but out of instinct, the kind that does not fade with time, only deepens. The wind moved again, softer now, brushing against the side of the house, slipping beneath the porch, passing over the hidden rows without disturbing them, as if even the night understood what needed to be left untouched. And in that quiet, with nothing left to reveal and nothing left to prove, Noah exhaled slowly, a breath that carried no weight, only presence, and rested his hand once more against Ash, the gesture small, almost invisible in the darkness. There was no audience, no acknowledgement, no moment of recognition waiting to arrive, only the steady continuation of something that had already fulfilled its purpose in the quietest way possible. Because some stories are not meant to be told loudly, not meant to be carried far beyond the place they belong, but instead are meant to live in the spaces where memory and loyalty meet, held together by those who choose to stay when others move on. And as the night deepened and the world beyond faded further into silence, the house remained as it always had, simple, unremarkable, easy to pass by without a second glance, and beneath it, unseen but never forgotten, the truth rested exactly where it had been placed, not waiting to be discovered again, but simply existing, steady and complete, in the care of a man and a dog who understood that sometimes the greatest act of keeping is not in what you show the world, but in what you refuse to let it forget.